My name is Leo, and I am a rational man. Or at least I was. I worked with spreadsheets and data streams, a digital architect building castles of logic in the cloud. My world was one of predictable outcomes and clean binary answers. That's why I bought this old Victorian house on the outskirts of a town that was little more than a gas station and a stubborn refusal to die. It was a fixer-upper, a project, a series of problems with tangible, solvable solutions. New wiring, new pipes, new floors. A physical spreadsheet of tasks to be completed. I saw its age as character, its silence as peace. I was a fool. The first few months were idyllic. The scent of sawdust and fresh paint filled the air. I'd spend my evenings sanding floorboards or repairing the intricate, if slightly grotesque, woodwork around the fireplace. The basement, however, was a task I'd been saving. It was the final cell in my spreadsheet, the last variable to be defined. It was dark, damp, and smelled of cold earth and forgotten things. A single, bare, 60-watt bulb hung from a wire, casting a jaundiced glow that seemed to be absorbed by the rough-hewn stone walls. It was in that basement, 3 nights ago, that I first heard the sound. I was sorting through a stack of mildewed National Geographic magazines left by the previous owner, a reclusive old man named Albright, who, according to the town's sole real estate agent, had passed quietly. The dust was thick, and my every movement sent motes dancing in the sickly light. I paused to wipe my brow, and in that moment of stillness I heard it. Knock. A single, solid, percussive sound. It wasn't a creak of the house settling. It wasn't the patter of a rodent. It was a knock. Deliberate, intelligent. It came from the far wall, the one that was built directly into the hill the house was nestled against. The wall was made of large, irregular fieldstones, mortared together with a crumbling, sand-colored paste. I froze, my hand hovering in the air. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than the silence that had preceded it. It was a listening silence. "Hello," I said, my voice sounding absurdly loud and small in the cavernous space. Nothing. I stood there for a full 5 minutes, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A pipe, I reasoned. A tree root shifting the foundation. The house, groaning in its sleep. I was a man of logic. I assembled the evidence. An old house, temperature changes, natural shifting. The conclusion was obvious. It was nothing. I finished my work quickly, the unease a cold stone in my gut. As I ascended the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched from the darkness behind me. I closed the basement door firmly, twisting the old-fashioned skeleton key in its lock. For the first time since moving in, I felt a thrill of fear in my own home. The next day, I went about my business. The memory of the knock softened by daylight and caffeine. It was just the house, I told myself, just the bones of the place creaking. That evening, armed with a high-powered LED work light, I went back down. I was determined to prove to myself, to the irrational part of my brain that had been spooked, that there was nothing to fear. I set up the light, banishing the shadows to the corners. The basement was just a basement again, a damp room full of potential. I even whistled a tuneless melody, a forced performance of nonchalance. I decided to start inspecting the far wall, the source of the previous night's disturbance. I ran my hands over the cold, damp stone, looking for cracks, for signs of water damage, for anything that could explain the noise. And then it came again. Not 2 this time. Firm, resonant, and undeniably from within the wall. Not on it, but in it. The sound seemed to originate from a point about 4 feet off the ground, directly in front of me. I snatched my hand back as if the stone had grown suddenly hot. My breath hitched. This was not a pipe. This was not the house settling. The rhythm was purposeful. It was a call, a signal. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling despite my attempt to sound authoritative. Silence. Then, a soft, scraping sound, like a single fingernail being dragged slowly across the inside of the stone. It was a dry, gritty sound that set my teeth on edge. It lasted for 3 seconds, maybe 4, and then stopped. Logic shattered. My carefully constructed world of data and reason crumbled into dust. This was something else, something ancient and wrong. I fled, taking the stairs 2 at a time, my heart a wild bird trapped in the cage of my chest. I didn't just lock the basement door. I dragged a heavy kitchen chair and wedged it under the knob. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee in my hands, staring at the basement door. Every rustle of the wind outside, every creak of the floorboards above my head sent jolts of pure adrenaline through my system. But the basement door remained silent. Yesterday morning, I drove into the tiny town. The library was a single room in the back of the town hall, manned by a woman in her 70s with kind eyes and a nameplate that read Marge. I asked her about the house, about Albright. Her friendly demeanor cooled noticeably. "The Albright place? You're the one who bought it." "Yes, I've been doing some renovations," she nodded slowly, her eyes not quite meeting mine. Old Elias Albright kept to himself. His family's been in that house a long, long time, since the town was founded. Did he have any family? Anyone who might know about the house's history? The basement, specifically. Marge looked down at her hands. No family. Not anymore. The Albrights. They were a quiet bunch. People said they had their own ways, their own traditions. She said the last word with a distinct note of distaste. There were stories. "What kind of stories?" I pressed, leaning forward. She shook her head, as if physically dismissing the thought. "Old wives' tales. Nonsense about old Elias being able to find things. Lost pets, missing jewelry. People would go to him, and he'd just know. They said he'd listen to the walls. She must have seen the blood drain from my face." "Are you all right, dear? You look pale." "The walls," I whispered. "What did he listen for?" "I shouldn't have said anything," she said, closing up like a clam. "It's just silly stories to scare children. Don't you pay it any mind." She turned away, busying herself with a cart of books, effectively ending the conversation. "Listen to the walls." The phrase echoed in my head all the way home. It wasn't just a knock, it was a language. And Elias Albright had been a speaker. The rest of the day was a blur of dread. As night fell, the fear became a physical presence, a cold weight in the room with me. I tried to watch TV, but the sounds from the speakers were just meaningless noise. I tried to read, but the words swam on the page. All I could do was wait. I was a prisoner in my own home, sentenced by a sound. And then, last night, it came. It started just after midnight. I was lying on my couch, fully dressed, my eyes glued to the ceiling. Knock, 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 3 knocks, sharp, impatient. They were louder than before, as if whatever was making them had grown stronger, or was moving closer to the interior surface of the stone. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed, a specimen pinned to a slide. The silence that followed was brief, taut as a tripwire. Then, a new sound, a voice. It wasn't a human voice. It was a dry, rattling whisper, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It was faint, filtered through feet of stone and earth, but I heard every syllable with terrifying clarity. It came from the same place as the knocks. Leo. It knew my name. A whimper escaped my lips. I curled into a ball, my hands pressed over my ears, but it was useless. The sound wasn't in the air. It was in my head, vibrating in the very marrow of my bones. Let US in the US. There was more than one. Knock, knock, knock. The last three were a violent pounding, a demand. I heard a faint trickle of dust and mortar from the basement. It was trying to break through. Then, the scraping started again. But it wasn't a single nail this time. It was multiple. It was a frenzied, scratching cacophony. The sound of countless hands, or things that were almost hands, clawing desperately at the inside of the wall. It was the sound of a horde, trapped and hungry, trying to dig its way out. I don't know how long it lasted. It felt like hours. The knocking, the scratching, the horrible, rasping whispers that now formed words, sentences. Cold in here, Leo. So dark. We see you. We taste your fear. The little man in the walls wants to come out. That one broke me. The little man in the walls. It was a phrase from a childhood nightmare, something I hadn't thought of in 30 years. How could it know? It was rifling through my mind, picking out my deepest, most private fears and parroting them back to me in its gravelly voice. I stumbled to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife I owned. It felt absurdly inadequate, a toothpick against a tsunami. I stood before the basement door, the chair still wedged beneath the knob. The sounds were louder up here now. I could feel the vibrations through the floorboards. The scratching stopped abruptly. The silence was a shock. It was more menacing than the noise. I stood there, knife held in a white-knuckled grip, waiting. Then, a single soft tap. Then, another and another. They were lighter now, less frantic. They were moving. I could hear them traveling laterally across the basement wall towards the stairs. The thing, the presence, was following the path of the wall, heading for the door. Tap, tap, tap. It was at the base of the stairs now. I heard the first wooden step creak under a weight that shouldn't exist. Then the second. It was coming up. It had left the wall. A new sound joined the tapping. A wet, dragging sound, like something heavy and moist being pulled slowly up the stairs. I backed away from the door, my mind screaming. This was impossible. It was in the walls. It couldn't just come out. But the evidence was there, in the slow, deliberate thump drag on the staircase. It reached the top of the stairs. It was right on the other side of the door. The tapping began on the door itself. Not a loud knock, but a gentle, almost polite rapping. Tap, 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 right at the level of the doorknob. The skeleton key began to jiggle in the lock. It turned slowly, first one way, then the other, with a series of sharp metallic clicks. The thing was trying to pick the lock. The chair I had wedged under the knob shuddered. The top of the door began to groan inward, as if immense pressure was being applied to it. The wood around the lock started to splinter with a sound like snapping bones. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I fled my own home, stumbling out into the cold night air, not even bothering to grab a coat or my car keys. I ran down the dark, deserted road until my lungs burned, not daring to look back. I am writing this from the town's pathetic motel, the Starlight Inn, where the neon sign flickers and the sheets smell of mildew and despair. The sun is up, but it offers no comfort. I called my boss and told him a family emergency had come up. My voice was so shaky, he didn't question it. I am a rational man. I need to find a rational solution. So this afternoon, I'm going back. I have to. All my tools, my phone, my wallet, my car, they're all there. My whole life is in that house. But that's not the real reason. The real reason is the compulsion I feel. A magnetic pull back to that basement. The whispers didn't stop when I ran. I can still hear them, a faint, sibilant echo at the edge of my hearing, and one phrase over and over. We have your name, Leo. We have your name, and we are learning your shape. I bought a high-quality digital voice recorder. I bought a crowbar. I bought a new, more powerful flashlight. I'm going to go down there in the brutal light of day, and I'm going to break open that wall. I need to see what's in there. I need to prove to myself that it's rats, or a trapped animal, or a bizarre acoustic trick. I need my logic back. But a deeper, more terrifying part of me knows the truth. I am not going down there to prove it isn't real. I'm going down there to answer it. The knock came from within my basement wall, and it has invited me in. And some horrid, broken part of my soul is desperate to accept. The house looked different in the daylight. Malevolent. The once charming Victorian details now seemed like sneering gargoyles and leering faces. The paint I had so carefully applied looked like a cheap coat of makeup on a corpse. My hand trembled as I slid the key into the front door lock. The silence from within was absolute and heavy, a held breath. The inside was cold, colder than it should have been, the central heating having fought a losing battle against the chill that seemed to emanate from the very foundations. The air was stale, carrying a new, faint odor beneath the scent of sawdust and paint. A smell of wet clay and something else. Something coppery and old, like a handful of pennies pulled from a riverbed. My eyes went immediately to the basement door. It was closed. The chair I had wedged under the knob lay on its side several feet away, as if thrown aside by a violent force. The wood around the lock was splintered, deep gouges marring the old timber. They weren't claw marks, not exactly. They were too broad, too blunt. They looked like something had simply pressed against the door with immense, crushing strength until the wood gave way. I stood there for a long time, my backpack containing the recorder and tools feeling like a lead weight. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to get in my car and drive and never, ever look back. But the compulsion was stronger. The whisper in my mind, "We are learning your shape," was a hook in my brain, reeling me in. I approached the door. I didn't want to, but my legs carried me forward of their own volition. I reached out a shaking hand and pushed it open. The staircase yawned open before me, a descent into a throat. The darkness below was absolute, seeming to swallow the beam of my powerful new flashlight. The cold was more intense here, flowing up the stairs in a frigid wave. And the smell, that wet earth coppery smell, was overpowering. I clicked on the voice recorder and started down, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the wooden steps. Each creak was a gunshot in the silence. The basement was a war zone. The single, bare bulb was shattered, glass shards glittering on the floor like fallen stars. The stack of National Geographics I'd been sorting was strewn across the room, their pages torn and scattered. But the focus of the destruction was the far wall. The stones were scarred. Long, deep grooves were carved into the hard rock, running in chaotic, frantic patterns. Mortar dust coated everything like grey snow. In the center of the wall, at about chest height, was a single stone that was visibly loose, jutting out several inches from its setting. The mortar around it was completely gone, pulverized. From the gap around it, a trickle of dark, viscous fluid had seeped out, staining the wall and pooling on the floor beneath. It wasn't water. It was thick, like oil, and it was the source of the coppery smell. It smelled like a butcher's shop on a hot day. This was it, the source. I set the flashlight on an old crate, its beam illuminating the afflicted stone. I hefted the crowbar. My rational mind was still present, a tiny, screaming voice in the back of my head. It's groundwater and iron oxide, you idiot. Bacterial seepage. It's explained. But I knew it wasn't. I knew, with a certainty that froze my soul, that the thing behind this wall had done this. It had tried to get out, and failing that, it had invited me to let it out. I slid the forked end of the crowbar behind the loose stone. The metal clinked against the rock. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the foul air, and pushed. The stone didn't budge. I put my weight into it, grunting with the effort. The crowbar groaned, and for a moment, I thought it would bend. Then, with a sound like a dying man's sigh, the stone shifted. A shower of dirt and pulverized mortar fell from behind it. I worked the crowbar, levering it back and forth. The gap widened. The darkness behind the wall was not just an absence of light. It was a substance, thick and velvety. The coppery smell intensified, becoming a physical presence in the back of my throat. With a final, grating crunch, the stone came free. It was heavy, far heavier than it should have been, and it crashed to the concrete floor with a sound that echoed like a tomb slamming shut. I stumbled back, panting, staring into the hole I had created. The flashlight beam pierced the darkness, and my mind, already stretched to its breaking point, simply refused to process what I was seeing. It was not earth behind the wall. It was a space. A narrow, man-made passage, so low it would require crawling. The walls of this passage were not stone, but a strange, dark, wood-like material, deeply grooved and polished smooth in places. It looked organic, like the interior of a gigantic petrified wormhole, and the passage was not empty. Crammed into the tight space facing me was a figure. It was humanoid, but terribly wrong. Its skin was the color and texture of the stone around it, grey, rough, and cracked. It was hunched over, its limbs folded at impossible angles to fit into the confined space. It was naked and utterly hairless. Its head was too large for its body, and its face, it had no eyes, just smooth, unbroken stone where eyes should be. Its mouth was a wide, gaping slash, open in a silent scream, and it was filled with what looked like shards of the same dark, polished wood that lined the passage. But the most horrifying thing was that it was moving. Its head tilted slowly, deliberately towards the light. It couldn't see me, but it knew I was there. One of its hands, long-fingered and ending in nails that were thick, flat, and worn down to nubs, rose slowly. It didn't reach for me. Instead, it lifted its index finger and gently, deliberately, tapped it against the inner surface of the passage wall. Tap, the sound was exactly the same as the one from the night before. This was the source. This thing. This little man in the wall. I couldn't scream. I couldn't breathe. I was locked in a paralytic state of pure, undiluted horror. The thing in the wall tilted its head again, as if listening. Then, from that gaping wooden-toothed maw, a sound emerged. It was the same dry, leaf-rattling whisper, but now it was unfiltered, clear and intimate. Leo. It knew my name. It had always known my name. It its mouth stretched wider, a horrific mockery of a smile. The whisper came again, slithering into my ears. "Thank you for the door." Movement stirred in the darkness behind it. Another figure, identical in its grotesque, stony flesh, shifted into the edge of the light. Then another, and another. The passage was filled with them, a hive of these petrified, sightless things, all now turning their blank faces towards the hole I had made. They began to move, not with speed, but with a terrible, inexorable purpose. The first one began to pull itself forward, its stone-like skin scraping against the wooden passage, its nub-like fingers digging into the grooves for purchase. It was coming out. I dropped the crowbar. The clatter seemed to break the spell. A sound finally ripped itself from my throat, a raw, animalistic cry of terror. I turned and scrambled up the stairs, not caring if I fell, driven only by the primal need to be away. I slammed the basement door shut, but the splintered lock offered no resistance. I didn't stop. I ran through my house, out the front door, and into my car. I didn't look back. I sped down the road. The image of that sightless, smiling face burned onto the back of my eyelids. I am back at the motel. I have not stopped shaking. The digital voice recorder is on the table next to me. I haven't had the courage to listen to it yet. I know what I'll hear. My own ragged breathing, the sound of the crowbar, the stone falling, and then that voice. "Thank you for the door. I am a rational man. I have seen the irrational, and it has seen me. It knows my name. It is learning my shape. And now it has a door. I sit here in this sterile, beige room, hundreds of yards away, and yet I can still hear it. Faint, but unmistakable, carried on the wind, or perhaps just in the crumbling architecture of my mind. Tap, tap, tap. It's not in the basement anymore. The knocking is closer now. It's in the walls of the motel. They are coming. They are patient. And they are so very, very hungry.